It's probably a cautionary tale more than anything else. This is a problem that traditionally no one's particularly excited to tackle unless they are very big on supply chains. But whenever, as a brand, you kind of think the right time is to tackle this, which is at some undistinct point in the future, it's probably always better to do it a couple of months before that.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Ecommerce Coffee Break podcast. If you're growing fast on Shopify, staying in stock without overstocking is a key. Spreadsheets can't keep up with this usually, so we want to talk about how you can do smart inventory, what tools you have there, and we want to dive into the right platform that's helping you as a fast-moving brand to stay in control and grow faster. Joining me on the show today is Sebastiaan Debrouwere. He is the founder of Genie, the simplest and most powerful AI inventory management platform for fast-growing Shopify merchants. Prior to founding Genie, Sebastian was a VC investor at Untitled Capital in London and early employee at e-scooter startup Cirque. So let's welcome onto the show. Hi, Sebastian. How are you today?
Hey, Klaus. I'm great. How are you?
I'm very well. Let's kick things off. Why does inventory management become such a big challenge for Shopify stores that are starting to scale?
Absolutely. I think what we've seen and what I've kind of seen throughout my career is that supply chains are generally a bit of a dry technical topic people don't like to jump into too much. But it's actually a key building block of building a successful brand. In part because you can only really sell things to customers if you find them, if you actually have them, as obvious as that sounds. But also because it becomes part of this very great sort of virtuous circle that helps you grow as a brand. And so really why it matters and why inventory management matters is as soon as you start reaching, I don't really want to call it product market fit, but some kind of, you know what the product is with your customers, is how you advertise them. You essentially want to be able to fulfill their need as much as possible. Without tying up all of your cash or without ruining all of your costs. And so that's why inventory management really matters and why it matters to kind of do it well and to make it a core skill of your business, not sort of an afterthought.
Mm-hmm. Now, most startups, most side hustlers getting their feet wet in e-commerce, they start with spreadsheets. And I did this years and years and years ago. Same thing. And spreadsheets are growing and then they break and you have sleepless nights and so on and so forth. What's the typical journey that you see from brands, from startups in e-commerce, on the tools they use and the mistakes they make?
Yeah, there's a big difference to begin with between people who build their first brand and people who build their second or their third brand. We noticed that some of our customers who are kind of building their third brand start with inventory up front because they realize it's quite an important thing and they want to get the system kind of pinned down. But typically, look, when you launch a brand, you'll have an insight, a passion, an opportunity, anything that kind of lets you build a brand around that. And so probably the very last thought you're going to have is, how do I make sure I have enough inventory? Because really you figure out, you build the front end, you build the Shopify store, you try to get your advertising funnels in place. And the first time you order whatever your supplier tells you, you have to order from them contractually. You sort of try to guess a little bit, maybe what the sizes or the colors are, and you run with things. That works fairly well early on. So it works fairly well if you don't have too many orders, you don't have too many suppliers, you're kind of only selling maybe in one country, or you don't have too many products. Where it starts getting very, very, very messy very quickly, and it's typically kind of the spreadsheets that you and I have built throughout our career and that break at some point in time, is when there are too many variables factoring into this. So I'll give an example. We've worked with a brand called Lenny Swims. They're an Australian swimwear brand. They wanted to kind of go and launch in the US. So suddenly they're involved having a number of warehouses in the US, manufacturing things in Asia, sending them to the US, making sure they could do two-day deliveries. And so they were trying to work out how to work with a couple of different suppliers, launching, 10, 20 products a month, each with their own sets of lead times and their designs and their sampling, and then getting those to customers at the right time. And the spreadsheet they had broke, because it was a spreadsheet that needed to work both in terms of planned product launches and tracking things like samples, and then the actual sales and when to kind of go and reorder things. And so when that broke for them, the way it broke was really that they suddenly became unable to launch new collections because they just weren't on top of what the previous ones were doing, and therefore kind of how much cash they would be needing. and really also how profitable some of these things are, right? Because if you launch in a new market, you may not have an idea of your actual cost once you kind of factor in customs and duties and shipments and manufacturing and things like that. And so you don't really know if you're supposed to be selling the swimsuit at $60 or 120 for it to make profit. So typically that's where their spreadsheet broke. They had it because they had a high volume of launches. You see other people, we work with a brand called Canada Bolts, who have, thousands of products and another couple of thousands of different configurations. For them, the difficulty becomes that you just can't check that many individual line items and try to make a set of calculations. What you want is a really focused view that tells you, okay, this is the stuff that is now running low. You need to restock. This is the stuff that you've ordered. It's coming in. You're fine. This is where you currently have too much. That typically is where these spreadsheets break, where they definitely break. And if you're kind of starting a brand and you're wondering, what's the latest point I can wait to fix something? I'd say the latest point you have to fix something is once you start selling in multiple channels. So it doesn't really matter whether you have 5 SKUs or 5,000, whether you have one supplier or a couple of hundred. When you're selling on Shopify in multiple countries or Amazon, maybe you start doing some wholesale. You absolutely need a solution because it goes beyond what a human can compute, understand, and track. And things just change so fast, right? In each of these channels, you have momentum and complexity coming in. So that would sort of be my take is I'm not anti-spreadsheet. We're not anti-spreadsheet. We respectfully all built our businesses on spreadsheets. But there's a point in time when it stops the growth that you figured out. And that's when you really should go and look at another solution.
Mm-hmm. I think the best part is not taking spreadsheets into your business at all on that level. And you came up with Genie. So what's the story behind Genie? How did you get started?
So I worked in consulting for a couple of years around supply chains, but I kind of built my own supply chain from scratch for the first time in 2019 when I joined an e-scooter startup called Cirque, which we ended up selling to an American company called Bird, one of our competitors. And we had ordered our first set of e-scooters to deploy in the streets kind of from a supplier we found online, and things weren't going so great. So I kind of went to China for 2 weeks to try and fix an issue with our joint venture partner, and I stayed for a couple of months and kind of built out a quality assurance team, a supply chain team that was kind of coordinating with 12 or so countries on what they needed for e-scooters, spare parts, things like that, and then ran the whole manufacturing cycle. And so I'd kind of gone out and built this whole organization almost. I think we were 23 at some point in that team off spreadsheets. And so we had one guy in our team called Jorge, and he was extremely critical. He was maintaining our kind of master spreadsheet of placed purchase orders and trying to sort of do this elegant dance between different ships and containers and customs and things like that. And that worked reasonably well. Look, I mean, we were in the process of implementing an ERP system for most of the existence of that company. And then we actually sold it before we'd even implemented a single module, because that's how long it takes to implement an ERP system, even if you're a new business. And I think for me, it gave me a huge appreciation of how quickly a problem can scale. And so even when I spent a couple of years mostly investing in online brands, in software that kind of enables online businesses. So companies like Attio and CRM systems, or inventory heavy businesses. I invested in a company called Joker, who are kind of the leading rapid grocery retailer in Latin America. I didn't sort of touch the problem directly, but I started getting back in a spot where I had a number of friends building brands, and they sort of asked me to look at their spreadsheets or to like sense check their work or help them kind of, take a good look at this. And a friend of mine was building a bedding brand, and he was going through a huge issue where he's doing a couple million in revenue. And essentially he missed the entirety of summer because they placed the order for summer too late. And so this is really relevant with bedding, right? Because you have different kind of like thicknesses and materials, and bedding is quite seasonal. It took me a while to realize that as well as an adult, by the way, that bedding is seasonal and there's colors and things like that. But so they had placed this huge order for summer, and they placed it so late that it actually only arrived once autumn came around. And that meant they had a huge amount of dead stock that they had to clear, heavily discounted, to try and have cash to not miss their kind of winter order. And so I kind of jumped into this with them. And it took me like all of 2 minutes to realize that they had a spreadsheet that had a Google sheet that was referencing a bunch of other Google sheets, and different people were putting inputs. And anyway, somebody somewhere had broken a formula by manually overwriting it. And the result was that the entire prediction had kind of reference errors in it. And so none of the numbers were right, or it told them not to order anything, or, you kind of see the situation about how you end up with having nothing in place. And it really frustrated me. It really, really, really frustrated me because I obviously knew how to fix it, but I also knew, the huge impact that this had. And so I kind of started looking around a little bit more. And what I realized sort of fairly quickly on was a lot of brands that are growing very quickly will try to avoid the experience that we have with Circ. So they will kind of, talk to professionals, and the professionals will be like, get an ERP system. And they'll be like, no, it'll take 6 months, 9 months, tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars. I don't have the time for that. And so my kind of take on that was there had to be a way for us to squeeze something that takes months into minutes. And as you can imagine, my early team kind of thought we were crazy for doing this. But there had to be a way to help a certain subset of brands be able to get on top of this vital skill really, really quickly. And so that was really the vision behind building Genie, was not let's build the world's most configurable software, even though we are extremely configurable. But it was, let's find a way to make this happen in a couple of minutes. And, a couple of years later, we've built that, right? You are now able to essentially connect your Shopify store. We extract all of your data from, your products, your suppliers, your historical orders, all these things in a very smart way. This happens kind of when you don't even see it. It happens in a couple of minutes. You upload whatever extra context there is, whether it's, existing purchase orders, which can be PDFs or things like that, supplier lists. And we try to get people to a view where we say, okay, look, here's the health of your business. That's the first thing you're going to see. And here are the actions you have to take from that. And they will help you kind of follow those through and take those actions. And yeah, that's been a couple of years ago now. But today, I think we offer kind of full end-to-end management of your reordering flow. And on top of that, also management of your suppliers, forecasting, reporting, and a lot of finance features. So ways for people to see what payments are coming up and where their profitability is. And that's been fantastic because there are a lot more fast-growing brands that kind of desperately need to get on top of this than we ever anticipated, which is the bit we often forget to say. It works really well.
I think it's the most important part. And I think a lot of brands, they sort of not only get overwhelmed, sometimes they get surprised by their success. You need just one post going viral, and then one of a sudden there are so many orders coming in that basically you're drowning in it and you lose control. And I think as a business owner, small business owner, or somebody who's scaling, you're not a data scientist, but you get bombarded with so much data that you obviously want to have an overview. Now, talk me through sort of the day-to-day job in your system. So who's the person working with your system? What's their daily task, weekly task? How does it look like?
Yeah. It'll depend a little bit on the company, obviously, and their size. But if we look at like most of our kind of typical companies, so people doing maybe a couple tens of millions in sales, maybe doing 5 million in sales. Typically, at that point, they will have brought somebody on board who's responsible for managing supply chain day to day, and so that person will. Well, this is what we see from the numbers. We've kind of not necessarily only from the stories. They'll probably start their day by logging in and looking at the Genie dashboard and getting a good overview of the general kind of health of their inventory and the things that are on track. Some days that won't require any additional action, but that, right, to kind of understand, okay, here's where we're at. No further action needed almost. It's not exactly like you have with, for example, if you have your triple whale dashboard, right, where you're constantly kind of going and adjusting campaigns. Other days they may need to be working on an order or a reorder. So they'll kind of take our recommendations in Genie. We've got them in a couple of different places. We've got them on a dashboard. We've got them in like an in tray called a buy now list. We've got them in kind of a spreadsheet on steroids called the inventory tail that we've built. But on the days that people are placing orders or that they're kind of starting to build these up, typically they'll go in, they'll start creating this kind of draft order. And what we will do is we will use the latest data to pre-fill the numbers for them. So kind of the big step that we skip for this individual in the day-to-day role is usually, once a week, once a month, they would download the sales numbers, the inventory numbers, manually add the kind of supplier restrictions, try to forecast forwards, come up with a number, plug in that number, run that by their boss, get approval, check if the number is still correct, kind of, that back and forth. We'll kind of take all of that and put it in one step. So we'll kind of say, okay, here's how much you should be ordering to be covered until this period that you would like to be covered. And we're quite smart about that. So we'll either work with like a reorder timeline, if that's what you have. But we can also understand seasons, right? So we can understand if you're building up a really big order and you're an apparel brand, that you probably want to cover the season, or at least the beginning of that season. So that's one really big day-to-day task, is kind of creating orders, then managing these orders, splitting them up in shipments, paying parts of them, things like that. First really big role. The second one we'll see is typically finance people. They'll come in about maybe once a month to go and pull all of the actual landed costs. So the beautiful thing that we do in Genie is, we know which order you're placing, when you're placing it, how much you're paying for it. And so we're able to tell you exactly what a particular product in a particular size actually costs you in the warehouse today and in a particular warehouse, because we know the current order, the historical orders, how these are kind of being consumed. So typically they'll look into that once a month. Founders will use Genie. Actually, I'd love to say we expect it about monthly, but we see weekly to daily to go and log in and check sales and inventory kind of progress, and then maybe double click and jump into these things. And then we have a set of reports, and those really are things that we hope people don't have to even go into Genie for, really. So we've built a bunch of kind of automated reporting that gets delivered to people's inboxes. And so they might get a daily email telling them what's at risk of running out of stock. They might get a monthly email telling them what their stock asset values are. They might get emails around underperforming suppliers that are like consistently late. Those are things that happen off platform, but obviously drive a lot of this work as well.
Mm-hmm. No, makes perfect sense. You mentioned that you integrate with Shopify and you pull all the data from there. Are there other APIs integrations where you pull data from?
We're obviously able to plug into people's warehouses. It's quite critical for us to have that data. And then we're now also able to work with things like Faire. Some people have got their Amazon setup running fairly easily if they're doing fulfilled by merchant. If it's fulfilled by Amazon, it takes a little bit more effort for us, but it's doable as well. And then your kind of typical return platforms like Loop and others. So we'll try to plug into all of these. I think the big one that is still on our list and that is really critical is QuickBooks and Xero, because today we don't sort of automatically write to somebody's ledger. And that gets more and more important, especially as kind of profitability is more and more of a challenge. Actually, one important one that I always forget to mention, because I never sold bundled products, but we we plug into the bundling app, so we also allow people to create and map bundles from within Genie to actually have things down to the correct SKU.
Mm-hmm. Bundles very important to increase your average order value. I think there's really value into this part of it. Who's your perfect customer? Who do you work with normally?
Anyone that's growing really fast. I'd say that we started off doing a lot of apparel, which is probably also actually linked to kind of my network. We've started significantly moving from that. So we've got people doing beauty. We've got more and more people kind of doing home, furniture, kind of large SKUs. The people we don't work with really, or that when we work with them, we only solve 80% of their problem, is anyone dealing with deep formulations or expiry dates. So think your typical protein bar brand. We can help them track things. We can't help them do, I think, what is the most important thing in the warehouse, which is make sure that they sell the stuff that's about to expire really soon. That we don't do yet. And then the same with formulations, because formulations, I think, are something that have a lot of complexity. Let's say that you're like formulating a particular kind of beauty serum. You've got all the compliance stuff to deal with, but you're also constantly dealing with the availability of particular raw materials from suppliers to your contract manufacturer or formulator. Those are not always available for various reasons. And so you're constantly almost like reformulating for every batch. And so the very important thing to do there is, I know. I know. You need to track across the batch. You need to be able to track the samples, the batches, the availabilities, et cetera, et cetera. You need to be able to do recalls. And so those are typically people that we don't work with, frankly, simply because building out their system is extremely complicated and personalized. I think what's very unfortunate for those kind of businesses is, to me, they're online brands that create a lot of value by developing, phenomenal and innovative products. They still get failed by typical ERP systems, because typical ERP systems will kind of still go and say, here is a rigid logic that you must fit. I suspect from everything I've seen that the people that will have the biggest amounts of spreadsheets are, the beauty pies of this world. And I feel sorry for their teams. It's really, really a huge undertaking. So those people we don't serve yet.
Okay. That sounds very complicated. Sounds like very complicated. And I've never looked into this kind of vertical or industry, so I have no background there, but it sounds very, very difficult. So
it's complicated. And I think for companies like us, obviously, you've got to choose where you apply AI most wisely. And that's really been a lot of our roadmap for last year, right? It's like, we can do forecasting. It's not incredibly hard to do kind of forecasting. We can do automated workflows and insights, but like, where can you create outsized impact for people with that? And it's not yet the case for these people.
Okay. But for everyone else, Genie is a solution. So walk me through the typical onboarding process for a new user. How long does it take? What steps are involved?
It can be as easy as going to the Shopify App Store and clicking install and going through a 5-screen kind of configuration where you import some files and tell us a little bit about your business. Like, here's the space I operate in, and here's how often I might be ordering, and we'll get it set up. So I think we have more and more customers who kind of set themselves up and then maybe book in some time with our team to kind of run through things. But the setup process itself is the thing that we've tried to get really good at. So you don't need to speak to a human. You don't need to wrangle any of your own data manually. We either read it from Shopify, or if you provide it to us in any format, we'll kind of ingest it and map it. To give an example of that, right? Because that sounds really abstract. If you have a supplier, you probably have a price list. You probably have a series of products for that price list. It is, specific to a certain time, and you might have another supplier who also is able to supply some of these products. We don't need a lengthy kickoff call where you explain us how these suppliers work and which these products are, et cetera, et cetera. You kind of go through the first part of the flow where you say, hey, I'm an apparel business based here. We're like, cool. We think you should be reordering this often. Yes. Okay. We've pre-filled your suppliers. Are these your suppliers? Yes. No, I'm missing a couple. Okay. We'd love to map your products to suppliers. Have you got a price list? Yes. Here I go. We'll kind of go and say, okay, this product will be ordered from this supplier. These are the different prices. And then all we'll kind of have to ask you once you're in Genie is, hey, which of these two suppliers is the primary one you want to work with? But yeah, people find this a little bit hard to believe sometimes, but it's, you can get set up by yourself. That's the big thing that we wanted to win on, was how do we make this something in a couple of minutes? And it obviously means that I think we maybe have, 10% of the people that install us and that realize they don't need us and then sort of uninstall within an hour or two, which we're very happy about. And we kind of, let them keep a free dashboard, and we're like, hey, in case you ever don't come back. But a lot of other people, what we see is they install typically because there's a whoopsie that's happened somewhere that's made somebody go, let's go and fix inventory. We kind of fit into two categories. The January 1st good intentions. We get a lot of installs the first week of January. And sort of the right before the busy season, like the QBR planning, right? When someone's like, oh, damn, Black Friday's coming up in, 4 months. We got to get on top of this. But then the rest of the time, we get a lot of whoopsies. We get people who have a situation like the one I described, where all their cash is tied up in one place. They have to find a way out. And the phenomenal thing for us, or they have to place a really big order that they don't know what the numbers are. And they've heard that maybe it's possible to have a machine kind of assist you with doing that. The great thing for us is it means that we get insane customer activity kind of within minutes of signing up. So I think we get something like 80% of our customers creating a purchase order and about 65% sending it off within about a day of installing Genie, which is, it gets a bit scary for the team and me, but it's millions and millions of dollars of merchandise value that gets created. And that's also what we then track, right? So if you kind of ask, like, how do people get started? Installing is the easy bit. The thing that we really track is somebody able to get value from this within a couple of days? And we try to look at that as either placing an order or kind of having a personalized analysis built in our inventory table, either using one of our templates or using one of their own.
Mm-hmm. How does your pricing structure work? How do you charge?
We've been told we charge too little. Um, but but so we try to keep it reasonably easy. There were kind of two things that I really wanted to avoid always. I wanted to avoid charging people purely on revenue because I think it's a bit of a tax on success, and revenue doesn't always correlate to complexity. And I've never, ever, ever wanted to charge people on seats. And I'm very happy that that's kind of slowly dying as a concept, because for most pieces of software, if several people in the team use you, it's a success for the team and a success for you. So today I have three kind of pricing tiers. We have a tier that goes up to about $60, which is pretty much for any merchant. So they can have up to, I think, 1,500 products, 50 suppliers. The only thing they don't get is like their sort of in-tray to-do list. Then we have about $100 plan, which is for people that have up to about 100 suppliers. And then anyone that has more than 5,000 products or more than 100 suppliers, so we kind of create a plan for them that's called Scale, and I believe it's around $160 a month. And that's it. Over time, we'd like to add in some kind of credits so that if you are, every time you generate a forecast, that obviously requires a whole set of calculations to happen behind them so that we know for each product what's happening, we can update it. We'd like to start doing that with credits because some people are okay forecasting, once a month and then checking in. And some people, due to their volumes, their number of platforms and so on and so forth, need to kind of forecast almost weekly or daily. And so we'd like to kind of help them budget for that a little bit better, while accounting for the fact that it's very expensive to compute all that stuff.
Mm-hmm. I think with this price point that you have right now, it's absolutely no-brainer for the value you provide. And just maintaining on an hourly basis a huge spreadsheet probably is much more expensive than what you charge per month there. So I think our listeners will be very, very, very happy to hear that. And I hope a lot of listeners will go over and try it out because it's a no-brainer. Before our coffee break comes to an end, Sebastian, today, is there anything you want to share with our listeners that we haven't covered?
It's probably a cautionary tale more than anything else. This is a problem that traditionally no one's particularly excited to tackle unless they are very big on supply chains. But whenever, as a brand, you kind of think the right time is to tackle this, which is at some undistinct point in the future, it's probably always better to do it a couple of months before that. Right. Because this is one of those problems that I guess I'll contrast it with paid advertising, right? It's nice to get analytics for paid advertising because it helps you be more efficient and it improves your CPAs and your click-throughs and your conversion rates. But if you make a mistake, the damage tends to be fairly limited, right? If you launch a piece of creative that's aimed at a new segment and it doesn't work, it's a couple of days of advertising spend and that's fine. The decisions you make in supply chain are things you need to live with for a long time. There's sort of the obvious bit of like, you might spend a couple of weeks out of stock, or you might spend a little bit more money to ship things in express and not via train or ship, which is what we had at Cirque. We used to constantly fly out e-scooters on planes, and it's expensive. But there's also a knock-on effect that a lot of people don't realize till they get large as businesses, which is it affects your cash flow. And the cash flow is ultimately what allows you to grow as an e-commerce business, right? Most e-commerce businesses don't go out of business because they go bankrupt. They go out of business because they run out of cash, because their kind of liabilities that they have to pay are greater than what they're able to finance. And similarly, if you look at really great success stories, like Gymshark, they have, negative cash conversion cycles, right? They were able to generate cash before they ever spend it. I think that's as geeky as it sounds, like the key reason you should get started on this earlier than you think is because the faster you master the skill, the faster you're able to start creating a set of circumstances where you can grow faster and more profitably, because you negotiate better deals with your suppliers, because you plan out when you spend your cash better, and so on and so forth. And so if you're listening to this and you're like, this sounds like a great January problem for me. It's now end of May. I endeavor to make this a June problem. Because if you make it a June problem, you will be in so much better of a spot in January in every single respect. That's
I
probably
couldn't
the one
agree
thing
more.
I really want to get out there, because I go to lots of trade conferences and the likes. People are like, "This is great for next quarter." I'm like, this is great for now."
Yeah, but I like that you highlighted, and I can't emphasize it enough, that a lot of brands out there, specifically growing brands, they're completely cash flow driven. And if the smallest thing goes wrong, your business can go down the drain. So you want to make sure that you have every tool in place to help you that this is not going to happen. Where can people go and find out more about you?
We've got a great website on genie.io. That's GENIE.io. And then we're in the Shopify App Store. And from either of these places, you can kind of watch demos, you can get in touch with us, you can book time. And I'm on Twitter and LinkedIn, which I'm sure people will be able to find.
Cool. I will put all the
And
links in
super
the show
happy to
notes,
chat.
as I will put them in the show notes. You're just one click away. Sebastian, thanks so much for giving us an overview about Genie and how important inventory management is. I hope a lot of people will reach out to you, and I hope a lot of people will make a decision now and not only in January. Thanks so much for your time.
Fantastic. Thanks, Klaus. Take care.